Good morning. Hi everybody. I think everyone knows me, but I'll introduce myself again. So my name's Really, or Dr. Das. I'm one of the metabolic registrars here. The aim of this session was to have a little think about abnormal movements or funny turns, and just sort of a refresher, looking at some videos and having a think about some of the differentials in different age groups as well. We've got half an hour, and as we go through, what I was thinking was, we can have a little look. My objectives was to have a look at what we thought a seizure was and what our criteria was. Having a little brief look at events in infants and toddlers, events in school-age children, and when we get to the videos, what you'll see, and you've each got a sheet there, is we'll go through some of the videos and see what we think about them, how we would describe the movements, and what our diagnosis may be. So, what is an epileptic seizure? Does anyone have an idea, or when we say the word epileptic, does anyone know how we describe? Up here is how the International League Against Epilepsy, their international guideline is, but does anyone have their own way of describing a seizure? I should say an epileptic seizure.
Normally electric activity of brain.
Several different symptoms from abnormal movements to abnormal behavior.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're thinking about where it's originating from as well. The International League Against Epilepsy put it as a manifestation of epileptic excessive and/or hypersynchronous, usually self-limited activity of neurons in the brain. And it's about as clear as mud, because what then is a non-epileptic seizure? What can appear the same, but arises as a consequence of a different mechanism. So not particularly helpful, is it? So how do we have a look, and what do we think about when we're seeing these things? So I've put up to 25% of children who are referred to tertiary centres, and this is actually based on American figures rather than figures that are here, have referred with epileptic seizures, and the PNED stands for psychogenic non-epileptic disorders, so basically non-epileptic seizures. And in America, I think a lot more is referred, I should say, and there is a lot more variation, but they put the range of 10 to 43%, as high as that are non-epileptic seizures. So how do we differentiate? I've already got some ideas up there, but how do you differentiate when someone comes to you with a seizure? What makes you think it's epileptic?
Level of consciousness.
Self-learning concepts.
Symptoms, how they present. With seizure history, like, as you say, a history from a witness.
It's tough. I mean, I've put differentiation as history, witness, examination, and often now people have videos if they're recurrent. How easy is all of this when you say it's history? Have any of you ever had to describe in your career something that you've witnessed to another person? How easy was that?
Sometimes it's straightforward.
And we're medical professionals as well. I hadn't had the time to do this in this session, but when I attended a epilepsy meeting, they got the very, very qualified consultants, who often are leads in seizure management, to watch a video, sent everyone out of the room, and got everyone to come back in and describe it to each other. I'm going to be honest with you, we were appalling. Timing was awful. And we're in a calm, measured situation. People are very bad at describing which side was left and right. We disagreed as well on lots of things. So that was interesting. In a nice, calm, large cohort of people, we didn't communicate as well as we thought. And we're asking parents or people to describe things that may not seem the beginning of. They don't have a time, they're stressed, it's often early morning. So we're asking quite a lot. Witness history is really important. I know through all our careers that we heavily rely on a really good witness history. And now our witnesses are, especially if it's recurrent, are turning into videos and the social media, which is very lucky for us. We've got our own, I shouldn't say video telemetry because we've got the video part, but we are doing really well. Also on examination, I'm sure through your experience as well, that you know that dysmorphic features, macro and microcephaly, hepatomegaly, neurocutaneous markers, cardiac murmurs, all of these things help you to come up with an underlying condition and associate them with certain types of seizures and movements. So, these are quite busy slides, and I will print out some handouts as well, or we can look at them later, about seizures or epileptic events in infants and toddlers. Epileptic events in infants and toddlers? Everyone's reading off my slides, so I should have asked before we did that. So at this age, I should go, why don't I go back again? Epileptic events in infants and toddlers. You've really quickly read the last first few, haven't you?
So you often get them in febrile conditions, so febrile convulsions, or you can get seizures. And again, this is interesting to see whether you would classify a seizure, say, in meningitis as being epileptic or not. I don't know, because it's definitely a seizure that's coming from brain origin, but would you classify it as epilepsy because it's, I don't know.
Absolutely, and often what we suggest is that, well, that definition didn't cover that, is epilepsy are sort of often recurrent events and taking away an untreatable underlying cause. And it's a difficult one because we are redesigning what we think is epileptic and non-epileptic and epilepsy syndromes and what we mean by epilepsy. So I think that's an ongoing conversation, but I think that's an interesting one. Would you call it an epileptic seizure?
Not in the context of an acute meningitis. It's a seizure associated with meningitis. But there are some seizure disorders that are associated with an underlying chronic or whatever other condition.
And febrile convulsions as well are associated with increased chance of epilepsy, and they have their own category now with putting them at higher risk, familial inheritance, and also developing, and we can go through that, we can come up to that later, but have their own associated progressive type of epilepsy as well, which is a certain section. Very small cohort, but a small cohort of that. Absolutely. So, infantile spasms is the other big one that we go on about, and that we should know about. So, non-epileptic events. Can I flip back again? In infants and toddlers.
Well, they quite often have sort of seizure-like kind of little fits after they've been like an apneic episode, like crying for a long time, and then they fall and then they sometimes kind of
Absolutely.
either post-traumatic or headache, post-head injury.
Absolutely. So, apneas and acute life-threatening events. I've put breath-holding spells. I've put cyanotic there, but actually breath-holding spells can also include pallor.
Mm-hmm.
So actually it's a misnomer because you can have both, but the mechanism is thought to be respiratory or a hypoxic cause, whereas the reflex and anoxic spells are associated with pallor and to do with a brief sort of asystole, basically, so cardiac cause triggered by stimulation of the vagus nerve. So the cause of the two is slightly different, but the visualness of it can look very similar. So I've put arrhythmias, I've got benign sleep myoclonus, all the sort of correctable things like hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, and I put metabolic conditions, but that's quite broad. Gastroesophageal reflux, Sanford syndrome, which is the name for the associated abnormal movements with that. Put self-gratification events as well, lots of unusual things we don't necessarily consider that can mimic seizures. Night terrors, parasomnia, so abnormal sleep patterns, paroxysmal dystonias and dyskinesias, so essentially movement disorders. What about school-age children? Does it change?
Well, febrile convulsions theoretically go up to like 6.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can't really call them febrile convulsions anymore, absolutely.
Epilepsies.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you know of any sort of more school-age children, adolescent type epilepsies?
Benign relambic epilepsies.
Absolutely. Do you know what age those?
Oh, I've been around 10-ish.
Absolutely, sort of about 8 to 10, absolutely, yeah. Any others?
So
Any adolescent ones?
Toxicology.
Absolutely. You know what? I didn't write that in there. That's a very good point. I didn't write that. Toxicology could be with the smaller kids actually once they've grabbed a bottle at all of something they shouldn't have done. So I've put the general focal epilepsies, epilepsy syndromes. With the teenagers, there's the myoclonic episode or juvenile myoclonic epilepsies, absence epilepsy. So these are typical syndromic characteristic types of epilepsies. Non-epileptic events, and you're absolutely right, toxicology should have written that. So the sympathy vasovagals, their version of reflex anoxic seizures, essentially, it's the same type of mechanism. Hyperventilation, cardiac arrhythmias, tics, thinking about other movement disorders, parasemias. I've put cataplexy. I mean, there's lots of, it just branches and branches out, but I thought let's have a look at some videos. In the videos, what I've done for each is just giving you a sheet, because the questions I'm asking each video are pretty much going to be the same, which is, are they epileptic or non-epileptic? What do you think? How would you describe them? And what would your diagnosis be if you had only one choice? There is no, there will be rewards after this, but there is no penalisation, and it's not marked or anything, it's just to help with a reminder. So this is case 1. So if you look through your questions, has everyone got a pen as well? Can everyone see? I'm going to stop some of the videos a bit early just because some of them are a bit longer. It pretty much goes on like that, there's nothing to the end. So, my question I pose to you, epileptic and non-epileptic.
Porridge induced.
That's the new diagnosis, Dr. Davidson.
Well, let me describe it first. Can I describe it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got a toddler who's what, about 8 months, I guess. Being fed. During the feeding, has initially some posturing, so turning the head to the left-hand side, and there was a bit of dystonic or some sort of posturing of the left arm and banging the left arm on the table. And then it seems to go on a bit more, so there's a bit more exaggerated turning and moving the head as well. I'd like to know what the EEG's doing during that.
Interestingly. So, you're right, okay, happy with the describing. Do you think this is epileptic?
It's hard to say, the child appeared to be a response of the pitch.
Because in most of the video he was interacting with parents.
And sometimes it was difficult. Maybe if I'm next to the child, I get that feeling. But I was also like, is it now like, yeah. But I guess it was repeating several times in the same pattern, so it made me more think of the seizure. But then
it's tough, isn't it? I think it is really tough, and it's why we're doing it. And James, that was a beautiful description, by the way, because not everyone's very good at. So you're absolutely right. This child, it's got dystonic type movements, absolutely, and they can look focal as well. He doesn't appear overtly distressed. He's not. It's difficult to know whether he's completely responding, but we are feeding him all the way through this, so it's a very interesting concept. This is actually Sandifer's. So non-epileptic, but you're absolutely right, it's pretty distressing to watch that and think that, and having heard whether you think this is seizure or not seizure. But this is a picture of Sandifer's. So it's the spastic torticollis, they've described it as, and the dystonic body movements. There's some, sorry if we carry on as well. So you can get nodding, you can get gurgling sounds, writhing of limbs, you can even get severe hypotonia during those events. So actually very, very significant symptoms. The range changes when you look at the literature about how, when this sort of phases out. It's usually infancy up to 24 months, some papers say 36 months. And essentially the management is to have a really good management and treatment of the gastroesophageal reflux. Interestingly, of those with gastroesophageal reflux, it's less than 1% have the syndrome to varying extents. So it is an interesting concept and very difficult to diagnose, I should say.
Is it associated with the severity of the reflux?
It isn't.
You have mild reflux and still have Sandifer?
I think you can still have mild reflux and still have Sandifer. I don't think it's always associated with the severity, but then we classify what is the severity. Is it the videophilosophy or is it vomiting, weight loss, difficult? But it's a very, very small proportion of those. But actually, the severity would make more sense to increase the symptoms because the treatment leads to improvement. How many of these children we don't know about? It's a difficult one. Okay. So this is case number 2, and I think, fair enough, James, very good to go with description then whether you think it's epileptic or non-epileptic. So this young lady is 9 years old. I'm not entirely sure what she says through some of the video, but I think that's probably an accent thing. So I'm going to go around this way. Marilise, did you catch that? I don't know if you were back in time.
I would say it could be epileptic.
And how would you describe those movements?
Funny type of movement in the left hand,
We're so medical, aren't we? No, I think I'm just encouraging just to see what would parents say. Actually, it's quite hard to describe, and just it's tough for us to describe as well.
Somebody listening,
Something jerky,
Arms and jumping around.
But it seemed to occur whenever she's moving. It's not like when she's resting. She doesn't seem to be having these movements, and her consciousness is completely preserved.
Although she was talking, then she stopped talking.
And her mouth went a bit weird. I don't know whether she's speaking foreign language or.
Sure. I have to admit, I got this video off YouTube, so I think it might be an accent thing for me. I'm not entirely sure what she's saying. I'm not entirely sure if her speech is impaired or not, and I don't think it is for the benefit of this video. But it is interesting, and you're absolutely right, Marilise. This is myoclonic epilepsy. These are myoclonic jerks. I think what is difficult is how do parents come and how do children come and describe their movements? Because it's tough, isn't it? Because we kind of know how we describe it, but how they describe it. But you're absolutely right, it is juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So I've put occurs between 8 and 26 years, but essentially the age of onset is usually teenager years. It's more common in girls, interestingly, and it's a very complex epilepsy actually. It's actually more than the myoclonic part. The myoclonic part, the way to diagnose is the typical myoclonic jerks. It's one of the epilepsy syndromes, so it needs to have a characteristic EEG, which will be often hopefully capturing the myoclonic jerks, associated with polyphasic spike and wave changes, also with the characteristic pattern in history. So you need to have the EEG diagnosis from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Interestingly, with myoclonic epilepsy, 2/3 of these have tonic-clonic seizures as well. So it's a very complex epilepsy, and it really varies as well. And they often happen usually in the morning. I'm still not entirely sure why that is. So that is something that I will have another search about, because that is very interesting about why all of these seizures happen to be in the morning. 1/3 of these also, interesting, James just mentioned that she paused as well, also have associated absence epilepsy. So it's actually often much more complex than just juvenile myoclonus. And as I said, the diagnostic has to have an abnormal EEG. And to induce these myoclonic jerks, they can have photostimulation, which often triggers the jerks. And management is with valproate. You've also got your option of lamotrigine in teenage girls as well, and levetiracetam or Keppro is a very good one as well, but can affect mood. So favourable is valproate, with young ladies is lamotrigine, and then you've also got your backup of Keppro. But it is a very interesting epilepsy. So well done, doing very well. So case 3, this young person's 7 years old, this young man, and tell me, this is a very long video, so I'll probably stop it a little bit way through. Tell me what you think. This little video goes on for about 5 minutes, so pretty much very similar. So as we're going round, I'm going to look at Jasmine. So Jasmine, how would you describe what's going on here?
Well, this little boy seems to have a general bilateral involvement of it's like a choreothotic type of movement with shrugging of shoulders, also blinking, and also a lot of facial grimacing. Because he's not interacting with us, so we don't know whether he's actually conscious.
He was interacting with someone.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I think
it's a tick. It feels like a tick.
It's like my son messing around when he was fed. My theory was this is a little boy, he's looking at the camera, he's perched on the side of the chair without falling off the spine. What's going on?
Yeah.
I think he's not faking it, but I think this is
Interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? And I think it is exactly what we're saying. We've even got the video here, but it's stuff that's interesting, James. This video does go on for quite a long time, and I think you can argue it's quite absolutely, it could be non-epileptic, but I think it's quite sustained, and I think he got a diagnosis of tics, James. But equally, I think it's a very fair point. And actually, if we have a little look,
it's repetitive.
It's on purpose, this movement. But I think if they were shorter, or you could just, with tics you can distract people out of them, so it's difficult, or you can sometimes, but it's quite difficult. It is pretty sustained. So he got a diagnosis of tics, but I do see that it's a difficult one. So it's the most common movement disorder in childhood. Age of onset 5 to 10 years. And it's these stereotyped purposeless movements. And I think because it's gone, well, for the benefit of the video being quite long, we suppressed it, we stopped it there, but actually it goes on for quite a long time. And they're often repetitive. So these go on, and I think he did get a diagnosis of tics. They can be suppressed voluntarily, but not all children know that they're going on. So some children, if they know, or if it's going on for a long time, can actually hold on to their arms or consciously have some interaction of trying to stop it. So it's a difficult one, but equally this one went on for quite a while. So I should flip back, but what would make it Tourette's? Does anyone know?
Vocal and saying bad things.
Absolutely. So you need multiple motor episodes and at least one vocal tic concurrently for at least over a year. So you need to have all of this for over a year to get a diagnosis. But absolutely. With tics, we don't often treat unless they are interfering with daily life, if they're causing problems, if they're having difficulty concentrating. And clonidine, an alpha agonist, is the treatment of choice. And it's often associated with psychiatric comorbidities such as obsessive compulsive disorder or ADHD as well. But interesting.
Causes tics.
That's a good point. There are some, they're thought to be sometimes immune-mediated issues. So we often do a screen for mycoplasma and strep infection. So we don't know if there's a viral or these are bacterial causes of tics. It's difficult to know if there's a preceding immune-related trigger, because the trigger is at 5 to 10 years. But I think it's not necessarily proven, that's the thing. And we don't do much with a lot of our tics. I tend to screen for the treatable causes of like mycoplasma. I've had a child with strep at high ASOT. We gave them a prolonged course of antibiotics for a couple of weeks, and actually the tics went away. So I think the jury's out. I think there are infective causes and possibly immune triggered and mediated. I don't think we, like a lot of neurology, we completely know. But is that how, if you had a child present like this, do you send a typical screen, or do you scan these children?
I don't. Sometimes we do go for an EEG if it's that traumatic.
I've just seen quite a lot of children having tics with some mild developmental delay as well. So there we definitely doing them. So I've seen quite a lot of children with tics having developmental delay as well.
Absolutely. And it's quite difficult. I mean, it could be the beginnings or a modified movement disorder, like a significant other type of movement disorder. And I think it's really difficult to tell with these things. So this is case number 4. This young man, I haven't written it down, is around 15 months of age. Just want to tell me, what do you think of this young man? As we're going round, I feel like I'm picking people. Spiros, what do you think of this young man?
I would say generalized tonic-clonic situation. And in the meantime, he seems to be, it's like intercurrent, so he has seizures, and then I'm not really sure, but by his look, you can understand that he becomes responsive, but then after a few seconds again, they're static again.
How would you describe his movements? I think it's quite a tough one.
Cycling.
It's got a lot of posturing again, as well as kind of movement. It's hyperventilating as well. It's got cannula in.
To me, it doesn't look like he's conscious in his
Yeah.
That's it. It's tough, isn't it? I was about to say, it's actually very difficult to describe. So, and we'll go on. This young man's actually having a frontal lobe seizure, and actually they're one of the most difficult and vague type of seizures, and actually get misdiagnosed or misconstrued even as night terrors, because as you can see, it's
Yes.
a lot of flailing, absolutely. So he's actually had a partial frontal lobe